Welcome back to our review of WoW Classic Season of Discovery Warcraft logs. Today's leaderboard shows some significant movement among the top contenders across almost all classes and specializations. Notably, the Druid Balance and DPS Rogue categories have seen new names climbing into the top 3. Let's get into it. In the Balanced Druid category, we've got some shakeups. Adriu from Crusader Strike US has climbed to the top spot with a DPS of 902.7, dethroning Stickman, who held the position for 2 days. In second place, we have Shart Quifa from Chaos Bolt EU in the Blessed Guild with a DPS of 862.7. And Katsi from Wild Growth EU in the Overload Guild rounds out the top 3 with a DPS of 860.7. The remaining top 10 are Schwiddy, Stickman, Centripetal, Yoz Hotmas, Acornjar, and J-Mills. We have a new feral druid leader today, BGTT from Living Flame EU in the Guild Beef Bar, boasting a DPS of 1395.1. Parspolice, yesterday's leader, holds the second spot with a DPS of 1365.6, marking their third day in the top 3. Talon from Crusader Strike US maintains their position at third with a DPS of 1295.1. The rest of today's top 10 are Lawsuit, Lil Claws Wow, Boycat, Xiao Zhane, Seonsu, and Apoth. The Guardian Druid leaderboard remains steady. Jiny from Crusader Strike US in the Guild Get Carried holds the top spot with a DPS of 805.0 for the third day running. Pseudoabjet from Living Flame EU in the Silver Saga Continues Guild is second with a DPS of 691.2. Shilandril from Lone Wolf US completes the top 3 with a DPS of 689.7. The remaining top 10 are Breakcore, Kamikaze Kong, Emsbury, Busset, Druby, Cadet Druid, and Samony. Next, Olgi from Living Flame EU takes the lead in the Melee Hunter category with a DPS of 1489.4. Yesterday's leader, Tree Ranger, holds strong at second place with a DPS of 1474.5. Tenuk from Crusader Strike US rises to third place, boasting a DPS of 1402.2. Tree Ranger's reign at the top lasted 2 days. The rest of the top 10 are Zatara, Fuxlu, Ulfadin, Afex, Gariglock, QX, and Shui Ren Shui. Stay tuned for more updates tomorrow. Let's now dive into the top 3 ranged hunters in the Season of Discovery. For the second day in a row, Fate from Living Flame EU Headhunter Guild dominates the one spot with a DPS of 1158.0. In second place, we have Kopromisi from Living Flame EU, Sepon Kalashura Guild, maintaining a DPS of 1132.2. Breaking into the top 3 today is Mihurith from Crusader Strike US, Degenerates Guild, with a DPS of 1128.3. The rest of the top 10 are Sargi, Fragmaster, Multigummies, Aerosparks, Waffles, White Sniper, and Pachanga. Stay tuned for more WoW Classic updates. Cuties from Living Flame EU continues to dominate the Arcane Mage category, holding the one spot with a DPS of 647.1. New to the top 3 is Mewju from Gu Lang TW in the Guild Duye Plus with a DPS of 593.5. Greats from Living Flame EU wraps up the top 3 with a DPS of 533.3, 3.3. Let's acknowledge the remaining top 10 Diggy Do, Eluriel, Ensei Mage Wara, Sokringe, Mbwaxo, and Nicolasmage. For the third day running, Delano from Crusader Strike US Guild Pass maintains his one spot with a DPS of 1112.1. In second place, we have Soja from Living Flame US Guild Press W with a DPS of 1073.5. Breaking into the top 3 today is Neolul from Living Flame EU Guild None of the Above with a DPS of 1059.4. A quick shout out to the rest of today's top 10 Walter Frosch, Hooktriefer, Puff8, Hyperactive, Gan Z, Baihuquan Shiren, and Scuba Man. Next, we've got a new one Frost Mage Exard from Lone Wolf US Guild Lethal with a DPS of 917.4. Yesterday's leader, Nojon Johnson from Crusader Strike US Guild Raw, holds the 2 spot with a DPS of 914.2, marking his third day in the top 3. TDMZ, also from Crusader Strike, remains in the top 3 with a DPS of 908.2. The rest of today's top 10 are Guti Blaster, Balasto, Astronomical, Panska, Paffelmage, Vanderfoot, and Zorin. Next, let's check out the top 3 Protection Paladins in the Season of Discovery. Farvold from Living Flame EU maintains his one spot for another day. delivering a DPS of 1027.9. New on the podium at 2 is Perf from Living Flame EU with a DPS of 972.7. And One Punch from Living Flame US of the Guild Cartel holds steady at 3 with a DPS of 965.9. Shout out to the rest of today's top 10 Visor, Bunbun, Mutua, Maglish, Baruch, Pink Sheets, and Code Pink. Today we have a new champion tech deck from Crusader Strike US, Guild Get Carried, with a DPS of 1178.2. Elf Chapo from Living Flame US, Guild Cartel, drops to the second spot with a DPS of 1176.1 after holding the top spot for a day. Buta Rizard from Living Flame US, Guild Cute Boys, remains steady at third place with a DPS of 1142.9. The rest of our top 10 are Muse, Garistan, Biu Liang Yun, Pogunhan, Shox Kui Yu, and Tyon. Today, Kasupo from Godowan Nugde KR takes the lead in the Shadow Priest category with a DPS of 820.3. Mazolt from Crusader Strike US holds the second spot for the third day in a row with a DPS of 804.4. Blacklisted Kook from Living Flame US remains consistent, securing the third spot with a DPS of 792.4. Our remaining top 10 are Scary Ghost, Siebi, Sweaty Flaps, Kawe, Haptics, Huan Shihuainian, and Meister. Asianin from Living Flame US continues to dominate the DPS Rogue leaderboard, holding the top spot for the third consecutive day with a DPS of 1398.1. Sil from Living Flame EU has surged into second place with a DPS of 1377.9, while Mezud from Chaos Bolt EU maintains his position in the top 3 with a DPS of 1334.2. The rest of today's top 10 are Umarin, Yams, Zero, Crisrol, Cloaks, Zangetsu, and Grug. Next, we have a new one-tank rogue, Sketcher from Crusader Strike US in the Guild We The Ops, boasting a DPS of 916.6. Hakwin from Wild Growth EU slips to the 2 spot with a DPS of 876.1, after holding the top position for multiple days. Nerf Assassin from Gulang TW remains steady at 3 with a DPS of 792.7. The rest of the top 10 are Lesrance, Nova, Sion, Waterchamp, Caulfield, Suckereth, and Maltoki. Today's Elemental Shaman leaderboard remains steady with Rumbles from Wild Growth EU maintaining his one position for the third day, delivering a DPS of 867.8. Fae Diansei from Sheng Minglai Yan TW holds onto second place with a DPS of 862.0, and Bandages from Crusader Strike EU keeps his spot in the top 3 with a DPS of 802.4. The rest of the top 10 are Sap, Mao Zhuchu, Shamandani, Kerberbing, Fryer, Gag, and Chizits. Next, we've seen a shake-up in the top 3 Enhancement Shamans. Nay from Dendansky Method in Living Flame EU has surged to the top with a DPS of 1403.0, dethroning yesterday's leader Sunisham. Baljondal from Ground in Godom Nogde KR is hot on his heels with a DPS of 1386.3, and Cryptenhance from Exhausted in Crusader Strikers rounds out the top 3 with a DPS of 1346.2. Sunisham has dropped to 4th place after holding the top spot for 2 days. The remaining top 10 are Irvienich Tapped, Mahatwa Erpacham, Bossiter, and Blue Warrior. Stay tuned for more WoW updates. Today we have a new leader in the Tank Shaman category, Shamrib from Lone Wolf US in the Guildbred Inc. with a DPS of 661.1. Sulfur from Crusader Strike US is now in second place, holding strong with a DPS of 653.5 after leading for 2 consecutive days. And in third place we have Bamsegom from Godon Nu Day KR in the Guild Ground with a DPS of 639.2. Our remaining top 10 for today are Jar, Com, Shanti, Guglop, Shani Rage, Walks, and Asuf Nibble. Strawberry from Living Flame EU continues to dominate the DPS Warlock category, holding the 1 spot for the third day with a DPS of 1097.4. In second place is Versa from Crusader Strike US maintaining a DPS of 1065.8. The new face in the top 3 is Matra from Lone Wolf US with a DPS of 1064.9, just edging out yesterday's third place, Wynoff. A quick shout out to the rest of today's top 10 Slurped at Bud, Buzzle, Wynoff, Biozombie, Erok, Lightwork, and NNK. Stay tuned for more updates. First up with Tank Warlocks, we have Dinosaur from Wild Growth US taking the lead with a DPS of 888.8. In second place, we have T from Wild Growth EU with a DPS of 831.5. and Lobster from Living Flame US drops to 3rd place, still representing Mud Hut Elite with a DPS of 828.4 after holding the top spot for 2 consecutive days. The remaining top 10 are Vervain and Jalipiana, Inida Booster, Proxor, Saibu, Open Coil, and Plexi. Next, with DPS Warriors, Arlondo from Crusader Strike US has taken the top spot with a DPS of 1,678.2, a significant leap from yesterday's 1,476.2. In 2nd place, we have newcomer Twareki from Crusader Strike with a DPS of 1,549.8. Rounding out the top 3 is Duki, also from Crusader Strike, with a DPS of 1,505.2. Yesterday's leader, Obi-Wan Kenobi, has dropped to 5th place. The rest of today's top 10 are Reza, Freds, MFX, Atasmos, Snacks, and Potens. Stay tuned tomorrow to see who will reign supreme this phase. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more daily content like this. Thank you all for watching.